Hello, and welcome to some Derps Talk About Games. I'm your co-host, Mango.
And I am your co-host, Buddy.
And today we're going to talk a little bit about Spider-Man Into the Spiderverse. But before we do that, Buddy, why don't you tell the folks at home what it is we do on this podcast?
Well, it's pretty simple. On this podcast, we like to talk about games, but also movies, and also TV shows. And we haven't done movies in a while, and there's a billion movies coming out.
Yeah.
So this is when it starts to get meaty and fun. Spider-Man Into the Spiderverse has come out over the weekend. To very rave reviews. Everybody seems to be talking about it. I feel like the official sort of drought that we have had for like movies between kind of like the end of the summer in August and the beginning of now is officially over, with Into the Spider-Verse kind of like paving the way, I guess I would say. And so yeah, so what did you think? Hit me with those. I guess the spoiler-free thoughts first.
Spoiler-free thoughts. I thought it was a great movie. I think you should definitely see it if you're a fan of Spider-Man. I think it might be a little bit worse if you're not generally familiar with the Spider-Man mythos. But we can talk about that in the spoilery section. But regardless, I think it's a good movie. I think it's a funny movie, and I really enjoyed it. What about you?
I think it's the best Spider-Man movie ever, which is big talk from me, as I am sure everyone, well, it's kind of simultaneously big talk and small talk. As I'm sure everyone remembers, I think Spider-Man 2 is like one of the greats, right? Like, it is one of the classic great best movies that came out of that early 2000s period. And it's amazing, and everything is really good about it, and it's a perfect movie, and all these other sorts of things. I cannot lavish enough praise on Spider-Man 2, but I think Into the Spider-Verse, in the same way, by the way, that I think, I've said this before, where, like, it makes sense that as we progress over time, we get better at making films, right? Into the Spider-Verse is standing on the shoulders of, the Sam Raimi movies and everything kind of along those lines, but it is insanely good, and I am kind of continuously flabbergasted at how good this movie became, because Sony is just not a studio that does good things with Spider-Man. Like, this is the same studio that 2 months ago brought us Venom.
Yeah, but we loved Venom, buddy. So
I loved Venom, but I loved it because it was awful. You know what I mean?
Yeah, fair enough. I don't best Spider-Man movie ever.
For you, that's Homecoming, right?
So it might be this movie. It might be Homecoming. I think it's tough. So I think in terms of like best Spider-Man movie, I'm going to give it to this movie. In terms of best superhero movie, primarily featuring Spider-Man, I might give it to Homecoming, which is like a weird kind of like hair to split, but like they're different. They're different enough that I do want to split that hair a little bit. It's definitely very good, and regardless of whether I put it a point in above Homecoming or not, it's still a movie that I very much enjoyed, and I think that. I think that the distinction at some point is meaningless. And so, I'm going to say it's a great movie. So,
Yeah, so I definitely think it is. I definitely think it's spectacular. I definitely think it's amazing. I think it deserves the hype, and it deserves the praise. And I'm really interested in it for a couple of different reasons. When they first came out of the movie, because I saw it with Rachel, I was a little like, I didn't have a point of view in a way. I was just kind of like, wow, what a great movie that I can't think of, you know what I mean? There is just nothing for me to grasp onto. It's this perfect spherical object that I just want to say, yes, it is good, and I can't really articulate why. But as I took some time to think about it, it really kind of blossomed, shall we say. And I'm very interested in kind of the juxtaposition between the two of us. But I feel like if we're going to get into that conversation, we're going to have to talk about spoilers.
Yeah.
So we should probably give a spoiler warning to all of you
Yeah.
lovely lords and ladies at home.
My last pre-spoiler thing I'm going to say is I don't think it's a perfect movie. But we'll get into that in the spoiler section. So, don't come expecting like the Citizen Kane of Spider-Man movies, I guess. But, it's still very good. So big spoiler warning here. Spoilers. If you haven't seen Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, for God's sake, go see Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Don't get spoiled by us because although I don't think the movie would be terribly ruined if you were spoiled on it, I think it's better if you're not. So, go away. That's your warning. Spoilers in 3, 2, 1, go. All right.
So my big thing with this movie that I think is interesting is, in a way, it's kind of like two movies at once, like for two different audiences, I guess is what I mean. Like if you're somebody who's like intimately familiar with the Spider-Man mythos, there aren't a ton of kind of like surprises in here, right? There's a couple of them. Olivia Octavius, right, is going to come out of left field for everybody. But I felt very well equipped to kind of like predict a lot of these plot twists, I guess I would call them. In a way that, like, and my comparison point at the time was Rachel, because she's seen the Spider-Man movies, isn't like insane about Spider-Man. And so a lot of stuff in the movie that happened, I was able to, like, I knew before it happened, but other people in the theater were still like, oh, about it or whatever, which I thought was like a very cool thing, because sometimes I can find that feeling to be a little bit like trite, like you can just, like the movie is derivative of the comics or whatever, right. You can just predict the whole thing end to end or whatever, but it still kind of like had me going, I guess, which I thought was pretty like neat and interesting. And so I wanted to ask, like which of the big like plot twists, shall we say, did you see coming? Right? Like, did you know? Like, did you get the first Peter Parker that we're introduced is not like the one we're gonna spend the movie with? I mean,
I knew that from the previews.
Yeah, I was thinking that like it was kind of like from the trailers.
Yeah. I actually didn't know that we were like. The most surprising thing to me about that was that we even saw this Peter, that we saw him die. I thought, like, I wasn't expecting that going into the movie, but of course, as soon as we get into it, we see that he's there. And I just wanted to call back to Standing on the Shoulders of Giants. I thought they did a great job of playing directly off of the Sam Raimi movies with that Peter's introduction.
That Peter was supposed to be, or wait, maybe not that Peter. Well, one of the Peters was supposed to be voiced by Tobey Maguire, but then they got Chris Pine to do it, I guess. Wouldn't that have been a trip, though?
Yeah.
Holy shit!
Yeah, no, that would have been great, just because, like they do the part where like they do the dancing thing, right? And
yeah,
like, we don't talk about that. Like, I thought that was great. What else? Like I kind of figured out the Prowler thing, but that was like more like movie logic than it was me knowing the mythos.
Okay, yeah.
That it was his uncle. And what else is in there? I don't know. I didn't see Olivia Octavius coming. I didn't even know that like Olivia Octavius was like a character.
Yeah, as far as I know, that is not a thing.
Oh, okay.
That was one of the ones that kind of like caught me. Well, not quite, because in the same way like the movie logic thing, I was. This is going to sound kind of crazy, but she was very defined by octagons, which I thought was interesting.
Oh.
And what happened, and it kind of created this like funny, like, I want to say like, I want to like brag about it to a certain extent. Essentially, so when the light fixture that Spider-Man gets stuck to, that Miles gets stuck to, is two octagons nested in one another, right? And I remember thinking, because I saw that her glasses were also octagons, and I was like, oh, that's neat. Her octagon glasses are reflected in like the octagon lights of her office, and then that just kind of carried me from the octa to be to, wow, that's actually kind of funny that she's a lot like Otto Octavius. But I didn't really get all the way there to be like, she is a gender swapped version of Otto Octavius. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I didn't know that Spider-Gwen was going to be in the movie, so I didn't see that coming. Like I didn't see her being a spider person until it happened.
Okay.
I mean, like as soon as like I saw the costume, I knew who it was, right? Like,
Yeah, I think the movie was pretty obvious about that stuff.
yeah. I mean, like that was just like a thing I guess I had missed. I didn't watch the only kind of preview that I paid attention to for this was the one at the end of Venom. So like that's kind of like the baseline of the information I had. Like I didn't know that Nora Spider-Man was going to be in it, much less that it was going to be voiced by Nick Cage, and that was a great fucking surprise because I love the aesthetic of Nora Spider-Man. I haven't actually read it, but like that just kind of I'm a sucker for like those kind of like pulpy Nori things. As you might be able to tell from our from the campaign pitch me episode. So I was happy about that. What else in there? Oh, I also didn't know that Spider Pig or Peter Porker was voiced by John Mulaney. That was a fun surprise. But plot wise, I don't think there were a lot. Like it wasn't like a super. It wasn't like a super twisty plot, so it's not like there was a lot to like get surprised by there, other than like the stuff we talked about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I definitely I thought that was a super. I thought that like that was like a super neat thing because like for instance I knew so Ultimate Spider-Man, which is kind of what this is all based on, right? Came out in the early 2000s and was like the thing that got me into comics. Like my local library stocked up a couple of like trade paperbacks of Ultimate Spider-Man, and I was like immediately hooked. And then after like 150 or some odd issues, Ultimate Spider-Man being kind of just from a premise level a reimagining, new continuity, kind of fresh continuity take on like the Spider-Man story. So like Peter Parker is like a teenager in the early 2000s, and Aunt May is a lot younger. And just like other things about that, right? Like, so for instance, that dragon monster in the beginning? So that's Norman Osborn. Did you know that?
Well, the Goblin, the Green Goblin.
Yeah.
I mean, I knew that because I know that Norman Osborn is generally the Green Goblin.
Yeah. Okay. That is a reference to the ultimate version of the Green Goblin, who does become like a big crazy monster, like a dragon monster sort of thing.
Okay.
Because he takes like a super soldier serum. That's like a big premise for the Ultimate Universe, is everyone is trying to like replicate Captain America's super soldier serum with like genetic technology and shit like that. Whereas like in the main universe, I think Norman Osborn took like a super soldier serum, but he's just a normal guy and he wears a costume and he throws gadgets and shit like that. Anyway, after like 150 issues or something like that, Miles Morales is introduced. Peter Parker dies, and Miles Morales is introduced. This is also how I knew that Peter Parker was 100% a dead boy.
Oh yeah.
Because like Miles is in like part of Miles' journey to becoming Spider-Man from the Ultimate Comics was about confronting the death of Peter Parker in a really public way. Like that whole funeral scene was like word for word from the even like shot for shot from the comics, to be honest with you. Like even that like same church, which I think is a famous church in New York.
It is. Yeah. And I knew that was a thing that was going to happen too, right? Like I do not know a lot about the comics, but like I actually didn't know that Peter Parker was ever alive in the Ultimate Universe. I thought the Ultimate Universe started at kind of like the Miles Morales point, because that's the only terms I'd ever heard it about was about.
Yeah, that's when it got like big and famous.
Yeah.
And so like all of that stuff was like really like deeply ingrained, and also like the Uncle Aaron is Prowler thing, right? Like that was all in there from the beginning, and that stuff is actually really great. And I thought that they captured it really well in the movie, because like part of it is that, and the part that I love about it is that it is like a really ambivalent kind of situation, because Uncle Aaron is like a legitimate criminal, and he's like pretty ruthless and rough, right? But he is also the only person that can like, that understands Miles and that like encourages Miles to express himself and stuff like that. And so like there is some real ambivalence about like that character in general, that I thought the movie like hit on very well, comparatively speaking.
Yeah, no, I thought the character was really well done.
I also feel like a lot of that has to do with Mahershala Ali, who is like continually the best like the best person in Hollywood.
Oh, is he the voice for?
Yeah, he's the voice. There's a lot of interesting voices in here.
Yes.
Like the Chris Pine one was, I mean, I sort of knew it from the trailer, obviously, but like Chris Pine is also just like a really good idea for like a Spider-Man that has his shit together. Like even if that Spider-Man was voiced by Jake Johnson, which I think would have been wrong because Jake Johnson is like the slovenly Spider-Man, and Chris Pine would be like the hunky Spider-Man or whatever. It was very clear from the story that we were getting, like the words on the page, that there is something a little bit wrong with this like life. You know, Spider-Man is not that successful. You know, he is not that well adjusted. He makes, you know, mistakes and he has all of these problems. And so like, even if I was like reading closed captioned instead of, you know, instead of hearing the voice to tell they were different, I feel like, you know, we would have been able to call that there's something fishy about this introduction to Spider-Man.
Yeah, no, and people talk about like that, like that's kind of like the enduring popularity of Spider-Man is that he's just kind of like a normal dude with normal problems. Yeah, so I definitely get that. Something else kind of along those lines I wanted to call out is that this movie is very visually stunning. Like the art is fucking phenomenal, especially in the areas where like they do like little crossover bits, right? Like you're like Peter Porker and Spider Noir Spider-Man having their own styles, as well as Penny Parker having like the kind of anime stylings. Was a little bit disappointed there. I have not read that, you know, those comics, but my understanding is that like she was always supposed to be kind of like a reference to Evangelion, and like basically the things that I had heard is that it is like in evoking that, it kind of evokes like kind of what's fucked up about that series, and obviously there's none of that in Penny. She's more like a puffy Amy Yumi type character. Yeah. Which is fine for the movie, but it's just a little disappointing because like I'm slightly more familiar with Evangelion, and Evangelion Penny Parker in this movie is not. Like her dad being part of the suit is straight up like a frankly a big spoiler for Evangelion. And it's got like a lot of like weird implications in that show. So just kind of being like a goofy little thing here was
yeah. I feel like they just. I kind of feel like those three, obviously with Peter Porker, it is like 100% comedy 100% of the time.
Yeah.
But like even like Noir Spider-Man is like a real story with like a serious character and serious stakes. And here it is just played for laughs. All three of those characters are essentially just played for laughs. The only characters with real drama to them are Peter, Gwen, and Miles.
Right. Yeah. And even then, I think that like I feel like Gwen doesn't get so if you want to talk about things that I thought weren't perfect about this movie, I thought that like Miles didn't have enough time. Like his arc happened really, really quickly in a way that I wasn't super satisfied with. Like,
oh, interesting.
Like he goes from being like locked up in the room to like, you know, being a badass in like 2 minutes, it feels like, and I felt like that it needed just a little bit more time in there to really send it home. I don't know how I would have changed it, but it just felt very short. It felt like essentially that you had the two competing storylines. You had Miles' storyline, and you had like kind of like the overarching problem of the transdimensional stuff that is a separate storyline. And so I thought that I thought that they just like that Miles' storyline just didn't get enough time in kind of like that middle phase where he's like going through like the actual character development. I didn't think it made the movie terrible. It's just the thing that I thought was not as good. You have any thoughts on that?
I thought, okay. I guess I kind of agree. I think the big thing is that a lot of it feels a little bit derivative, which is sort of fine because it's kind of a kid's movie, but like this is like an arc I've seen a gazillion times. And I don't know. Part of me just wants to like deconstruct the entire question. Like, I really don't think movies. I think perfect movies are a little bit of like a figment, and that like I'm pretty fine in accepting these flaws. That doesn't really like bother me all that much. So I guess I agree. That makes sense. That I still think like the movie is, you know, amazing, and it's the best Spider-Man movie, and all these other sorts of things. But I guess I would kind of agree with that.
Yeah, no, that's, like, I'm not looking for you to be like, it was, again, I think I agree with you that like there's no such thing as a perfect movie, but I do believe in kind of like pointing to flaws where I see them.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah.
Similarly, like I thought that like maybe this is like more of this kids movie stuff you're talking about, but like because of like the nature of the movie, like Miles, I think, wanted an arc because he's ostensibly the main character, and I think everybody like I think Gwen and Peter B. Parker got like kind of like half arcs that like I would have been fine with them just kind of being like whatever arcs.
Wait, Peter. So you don't think Peter, the real Peter, got an arc? Like, or sorry, the Peter B. Parker got an arc.
No, I thought he got an arc. I just thought it was also like very abbreviated, right? Like I thought
really,
yeah, like I thought that like because we never see him actually like address his problems with Mary Jane, right? Like he only addresses them in like the persona of a waiter with like not his Mary Jane, which is fine, right? Like it's the thing that I like for a secondary character. That's about the amount of arc I expected for him. It just feels like because Miles didn't get the arc that I thought he like the fullness of the arc that I wanted out of it. It kind of pulled those into relief as also things that were like again fine for what they were, which were secondary characters. But it kind of highlights it, if that makes sense, right? Like.
See, I think I disagree with that. Specifically because I actually really like that about the movie, that it doesn't need to explain it to you, right? This is a movie about Peter, having weird commitment issues with his wife, about being a father and about having kids. And he, over the course of essentially parenting Miles, he gets to the other side of that issue, and it just ends with, all you need is him standing on her doorstep and saying hi again and reconnecting with her in order to like fill in the subtext of, yeah, Peter had issues with kids, and now, I mean, they make a joke about it because he says somewhere, he's like, wait, do I want to be a father?
Yeah.
And I feel, and that's all you need, I feel like, and I was glad that it didn't feel the need to be like, to include another minute and a half of Peter being like, oh, Mary Jane, I now know I want to be a father so bad.
No.
Like, you know what I mean?
So I absolutely agree with you, right? Like I said, like I think if this movie was Peter B. Parker's movie, you'd get more of it because more of the attention would be on him, and it'd be like basically his entire like the whole story would be his story. And
okay.
And like I said, I don't think it's a problem for him. It's just a thing that I think gets like I could feel that more, especially at I think this is also more true for Gwen Stacy because her arc was essentially like in her like intro she says, I don't do friends anymore, and then she like becomes friends with Miles, which is like the tamest like the like I want to say it's nothing, but like it feels very kind of like feels very nothing.
The reason, by the way, that is the reason for that is actually very structural. She never has to like grapple with her problem in a way.
Yeah.
Like she pretty effortlessly folds into the team, and it's not like she ever goes through a thing like, I promised myself I would never have friends, and then like dips out or something like that. Whereas with Peter B. Parker, he does spend a good amount of time being like, no, Miles, no, I'm not doing this. We're not, like this is not happening. And like that whole thing at like the lab or whatever is basically one giant set piece to establish, well, at the beginning of this, Peter was really dismissive of Miles and not actually, fulfilling whatever promise he kind of makes, okay, Miles is okay at this, but more importantly, Peter is actually okay with this. Right?
Okay.
And I thought like all of that stuff was pretty great and pretty solid.
Yeah, no, I buy that. I buy that.
But yeah, I definitely agree when it comes to Spider-Gwen, that she did not get the same sort of treatment. I appreciate that it was just friends and that it wasn't like, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
I thought it was going to be like mushier, and they were going to end up like tongue fucking.
It's a kids movie, buddy.
I mean, it is. I know, but like kids, it's like a teenage kids movie.
Yeah, you're right.
Like,
You're right. I mean, there were definitely those undertones there.
Yeah.
What was I gonna say? So something I wanted to ask you is, why is Miles' dad named Jefferson Davis? Is there like a reason for that?
I actually don't know. Let's look this up real quick.
Because it comes up in the Spider-Man game as well. Miles features in that game very low. Like he gets bit towards the end of the Spider-Man PS4 game.
What's actually very funny is I do remember him being named Jefferson Davis, but I kind of don't remember ever questioning it myself. Like I feel like this is something where like I learned that he is Officer Davis and that his first name is Jefferson, but like never put the two together and like heard it in my head that his name was Jefferson Davis.
It's too specific a name for it like not to mean something, right? Like no, I mean obviously it's the president of the Confederacy. It's just like you don't.
What's funny? I just looked it up on like the Marvel wiki, and it just as under trivia, Jefferson Davis shares a name with a famous Confederate States of America leader. That's it. It just points it out. I really have no idea because Miles Morales obviously like he came about in the 2010s. You know what I mean? Like. This is a very modern thing from a very modern guy. He was created by a guy named Brian Michael Bendis, who's the person who first started writing Ultimate Spider-Man and, wrote Peter Parker to his death and then introduced Miles for the first time.
Did you catch that B. Bendis was a contact on his phone?
Oh, I did not catch that. I knew he like executive produced the movie. He got I think he got like the Stan Lee credit, of being an executive producer because he created the character. But that's it. That's clever. I always miss little shit like that. I feel like I never catch up on it.
I mean, I missed the Octagons thing, so you got me on that one.
Yeah.
Speaking of Stan Lee, I thought that his I guess mostly coincidentally, it was like a fitting kind of cameo for him to be in, like right after his passing, for it to be like.
Yeah, I know that hit me. That hit me in a way that like I was like, whoa, this is like the last Stan Lee cameo I'm ever gonna see.
I don't know if that's true. I think I read somewhere that he might be in. That he might have had a couple. Like he might have had Endgame recorded before that happened. But the fact that he's talking about the death of Spider-Man in kind of ways that like you couldn't have written it it is so like perfect a kind of send off for Stan Lee himself, right? Like if you imagine Spider-Man talking about Stan Lee, it fits just as well. That I can't part of me went me like, did they like know he was going to die and have him record it like this so it would be like this fitting? But I thought it was great. Yeah,
it's kind of like a grim thought. Like
yeah,
a very morbid thought. Like
sure.
Every filmmaker who's getting a Stan Lee cameo is like, okay, we have to put a ton of gravitas in this, because this could be the last one, you guys. You know what I mean? Yeah, that's insane.
Yeah.
I super sort of feel that. I was actually really happy with the way that they kind of focused on Miles's Brooklyn kind of life.
Yeah.
Even just like the little thing at the end where he's going through his old school and like high-fiving everyone, and then he goes to his new school and he's like a super out of
fish
out
out
of
of water
his element kind of nerd. And then at the very end, as Spider-Man, he's like high-fiving everyone again. I thought that was like a cute little visual metaphor.
Yeah, no, I buy that.
I do, and I do with So I, in a certain sense, I kind of think we're beating around the bush. I think that like the structure of the movie and everything is great and all that, but really what sells it are these visuals.
Yeah.
Like there is so much to the way that this movie was animated that I feel like was beyond spectacular and really awesome and really good, and not just in like a visceral way, but in like a really like thoughtful kind of like in a really sort of like thoughtful way. Like I think some of the things that they set up are only possible specifically through the animation style that they had kind of adopted into in the first place, if that makes sense, right? I don't really know what I would call this from like an analytical point of view. Like I want to say it's surreal or like hyper real or something like that. But the fact that they are not going for realism, I think makes a huge difference, and is sort of like allows me to ride the roller coaster a lot better than like other movies that do sort of shoot for realism. I just watched Coco on Netflix, which I hadn't seen in theaters. It's like the Pixar movie about a Mexican boy on the Day of the Dead who kind of like passes over to like the other side or whatever. But something about that movie that really kind of like bugged me to a certain extent was how much they wanted it to look like actual Spain. Like it is cartoonish in the sense that they're like they all have like these huge eyes and their proportions don't make any sense or all that stuff. Like, but like this isn't. We're no longer in the world of like Toy Story or like A Bug's Life anymore, or even like Finding Nemo. When when you have movies like Inside Out or movies like Coco that are like trying to depict or accurately depicting real people like living sort of like real lives, and there's some like weird dissonance to that sort of for me. Like it's almost like an uncanny valley thing where I want it to be a little bit more shades of gray and abstract and cartoony. And this is a movie that is very like cartoony, right? And I was never for an instant bothered by a giant dragon holding Spider-Man in a crazy multi-dimensional beam or anything like that. Or even just like, the Looney Tunes logic that drives Spider-Ham versus the anime style of Penny Parker, right? Like, or is that her name?
It's Penny, I believe.
Yeah, whatever. Okay, whatever. Like we were primed to accept those differing animation styles brought into this movie, I feel like, just because it does things like add, stress lines when people get hit or something like that. Or like even small things, right? Like the fact that the masks themselves move and emote, that's obviously completely unrealistic, right? Like outside of Civil War, which I have to say, I really appreciate that Civil War did this. I think this is a very core part of sort of the visual language of Spider-Man, is his ability to like increase and decrease the size of his eyes, and kind of emote a little bit with those eyes. Otherwise, you do sort of like run into some problems. But like that is expressly a hyper-real thing, right? Like it is a part of the cartoonish aspect of this stuff. And I feel like if we hadn't had such a good ground level basis in those sorts of things, just by the animation style setting us up for that, when Peter Porker, when Spider-Man Noir, like when all of these other Spider-Men exist in the same universe with their different animation styles, I feel like that would have been a lot more like jarring.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with you. Like I agree with you pretty much 100%. That it's not like a Who Framed Roger Rabbit, right? Like where like that contrast is supposed to be part of it. It like it's close enough that you can appreciate the contrast, but like it's not so far that it feels like that's like, this is not like cartoons invading on the real world. This is like slightly different shades of the same kind, like this variations of the same type of cartoon.
Because like one of the things about Who Framed Roger Rabbit is that it is cartoons and realism in a binary, right?
Yeah.
But this is shades of gray, right? Because there is no realism, really. Yeah. There's noir, there's anime, there's Looney Tunes, there's, I guess I would say that Gwen, Peter, and Miles all kind of have, like, the same fundamental art style.
Yeah, I would agree.
But I think that, yeah, but if there's anything about this movie that makes it above and beyond and special and spectacular, it is those aspects of it. I mean, they kind of spoiled it in the trailer, but I was really, like, moved by the shot of Miles jumping off the building and falling down, but from the movie, but the movie is upside down, so he's falling up into the city. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that shot is great on the big screen. And there's a lot of that kind of stuff that worked really well.
I agree 100%. Yeah. Kind of in that vein, something again, this is gonna be like a comic book trivia thing, but is Kingpin like Kingpin's always kind of like weirdly like he's a big dude, but like maybe like unnaturally big. Is he like supposed to be something special in Ultimate, or is he just like?
So by the way, the Ultimate Kingpin is the best version of Kingpin. Fight me. One of the best parts about Ultimate Kingpin, that's my favorite thing about it, is that well, whatever. That is another piece of trivia that I think is just cool, and I'm really sad they didn't use it because it is like literally the best Spider-Man thing ever. But yeah, he's definitely like a big guy. Like he's huge.
Right.
And the Ultimate Universe is so one of the cool things about the Ultimate Spider-Man is that it was written and penciled by the same pair for over 100 issues, for like 120 issues. They actually set the record for like the longest like writer artist pairing. They took it from Stan Lee and Jack Kirby on the Fantastic Four in the 60s. And it was by Brian Michael Bendis and a guy named Mark Bagley, who's a great artist. But he is very kind of like cartoony. And if you would look up any of his art from this stuff, a lot of his art actually gets used as promotional art. Like when you see like Spider-Man on a lunchbox or something, like a lot of the times it is a Mark Bagley Spider-Man.
Okay.
And Wilson Fisk in that universe is like huge, right? Like he is a giant guy. His hand is so big in the comic that he holds a guy's whole head inside of his two hands and he crushes it, right? So like he is huge, and he is like a looming kind of like domineering presence. It is not quite in that like
He's not like the question is more like is it like a superpower-esque thing, or is he just like a big normal guy?
No, he's just like a big normal guy in the Ultimate Comics. I felt like in the movie that he was also a normal guy, but it was like stylistic in a way.
Yeah.
In like, you know, because they gave him that small face and that like just pitch black suit, in order to kind of like make him wash over the entire screen. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and his head, he like basically his like head is part of his torso.
Yeah.
And you know, it's I don't know. Kingpin has always been weird to me because like he's always been like a dude that like I'm never quite sure if he's supposed to be like if he's supposed to have like some aspect of like superness to him, because he's always like so much stronger and so much bigger than like what you would conceive of a normal person. It's just a weird thing about Kingpin, the character, which I think is neat. Like I think it speaks to a lot of kind of like what superheroes are, which is like, you know, even the normal people are a little bit different. But it also kind of like translates weird when you like whenever you do a Kingpin that isn't in an animated form, like an animated form, it's weird because like, you know, like Vincent D'Onofrio I think was an excellent Wilson Fisk. I don't know if he was a great Kingpin, if that makes sense. In the Daredevil Marvel series, I just don't think you can because of this realism thing that we've been talking about with the animation style. I don't think Kingpin rather translates well into like a live action format. Because if you make him big, like it's obvious that like something's different about him, and if the answer is no, he's just big, even though you've animated him to be, it's kind of like honestly the Warcraft movie, right? Like the regular humans look weird next to the CG orcs. A Wilson Fisk of appropriate size would look weird.
I actually
supposed to be
really
a
did
normal
like
dude.
Michael Clark Duncan in the 2004 Daredevil movie, which I know is a very like unpopular opinion. Everybody hates that movie, but I thought he was probably the best Kingpin you're ever going to get in live action. Even though I like Vincent D'Onofrio, and I think if Michael Clark Duncan was reading all of Vincent D'Onofrio's lines in that series, it would have been a more true kind of like Kingpin. But like, there's really no better visual signifier of the Kingpin than Michael Clark Duncan was.
I don't think I ever saw the original Daredevil, so I can't really comment on that.
Do you ever see the Green Mile?
Yeah. No, I know who Michael
Yeah.
Clark Duncan is.
Oh,
yeah,
okay,
so, So I get that.
Because you know, like
I can
he's
match
big,
that. Yeah.
and he's bulky, right? Because that's like another part of it is
Yeah.
like the sort of like the bulk of the Kingpin, and yeah. I mean, I love the Kingpin. I think the Kingpin is one of the great. One of the neat things about the Ultimate Universe is that because like it kind of got to cherry pick continuity. It sort of ended up doing a few different sort of like there were kind of like three parallel storylines. One of them was Norman Osborn, right, and Peter's relationship to Norman Osborn. The second one was Spider-Man / Peter's relationship to the Kingpin, and the third one was kind of Venom, who is much different in the Ultimate Universe and kind of like related to Peter's father and stuff like that. But so the interesting thing about Kingpin in the Ultimate Universe is that like he is the person that kind of sticks it to Peter the most. Peter never gets real solid victories against the Kingpin. He finds a videotape, like a whole arc is about Peter getting the videotape of Wilson Fisk murdering a guy, right, and submitting it to like the police and getting Wilson Fisk arrested. But then like, you know, he buys off the judges or whatever the case may be and gets it thrown out as like doctored evidence or something kind of along those lines. You know, it like there are always these kind of like half measures when it comes to, or like half victories. But the best one is that Spider-Man is trying to take down like the Kingpin's like operations, like insofar as he's making money. And so he successfully disfigures Wilson Fisk's criminal enterprise, right? Where he forces Kingpin out of the game, like out of crime entirely just because like things are too hot. And Kingpin goes to the wrestling company. Do you remember how in the first Spider-Man movie he's a wrestler?
Yeah.
That's pulled from the Ultimate Comics. He goes to the wrestling company that had that featured the very first appearance of Spider-Man, buys the wrestling company, and starts making Spider-Man merch because he owns the licensing right to Spider-Man as the wrestling character that he first appeared as, right? And then Peter gets fucking pissed about this, and he goes to the Kingpin's house, and the Kingpin is like, well, you took my criminal empire from me, so I needed to make back that money, and I figured, why not buy the rights to you? So no matter how much money you ever cost me, just by you being you, I will always make more, right? And stuff like that like really sells the Kingpin to me, in a way that I think is like really cool and interesting. And I actually kind of feel like if I were to quibble with this movie, I think that was the coolest opportunity that they had to do stuff with that Kingpin character, and they kind of just went for this sort of trite multiple universe Vanessa thing that I thought was kind of like, it was like, okay, you know, it was fine. I can't complain about it really. It's just like, because I'm so well acquainted with like the relationship in the comics, I am sad that it wasn't what that could have been.
So I actually liked it, but I want to point out that I think that this is a point where like you need to know who Kingpin is to some extent, right? Like I'm no expert, but I know like the general arc of what a Kingpin looks like for it to really hit home that this is like, I don't know, in some ways a humanizing moment for the Kingpin, right? Like this isn't a thing that he's doing as one of his business schemes. This is a thing he's doing because he's hurting, right? Like because he is a person with real emotions, and I enjoyed that, even though it didn't go too deep into it. But like it's one of those things where the best villains are the ones that kind of like are like reflections of your how do I want to, or reflections of your own conflicts, and like his yearning to Vanessa is kind of like, it's mirrored in Peter B. Parker a little in some ways, and it's kind of mirrored in all of the, like, I think one of the best moments of the movie was, in kind of like small way, was Peter meeting up with Aunt May, because like they had both lost their respective versions of each other, and the moment where he says like, "I'm not ready for this," was I think incredibly real in a way that like I wasn't expecting. I thought it was really touching. I thought it was really well done.
I mean, this is what I mean. Like, I can't complain about like the Wilson Fisk we got. I think that is also very core Wilson Fisk. He is very motivated in the Ultimate Comics, even by his like love for Vanessa and all of that stuff. So I'm definitely kind of like on board with the portrayal that we got. But I seriously recommend to people, if you want a new thing to like read, get Marvel Unlimited and start at issue 1 of Ultimate Spider-Man by Brian Michael Bendis and Mark Bagley, and read it end to end, because like the arc and all of the stuff that the Kingpin goes through with Peter is like some of the best comic storytelling. It is just so good and like so extra, and I love it. And I was a little bit disappointed that I didn't get that stuff on screen. Honestly, it's kind of just like asking you to have your cake and eat it too. You need a lot more setup for that to work. This Kingpin clearly wasn't even all that concerned. Like it was much more about the alternate universe shit. Yeah. You know what I mean? Than it was about like the relationship between him and Spider-Man, even in the same way that like, and this is kind of like the Marvel structure in a way, so I kind of understand why they went for it, but like the core relationship is between Peter and Miles, right? It's not between Miles and Kingpin. Kingpin is really kind of, he's there, he's motivated, but he's just he kind of isn't super important in the overall scheme of things, outside of creating the core conceit of like the movie. The core relationship is between Peter and Miles, and I think it is it is absolutely the right target to hit, to aim for that.
Just it's kind of in that vein. These things that you are pointing to, like, I don't know all of them, but I know some of them, right? Like, I am generally familiar with some of the Spider-Man mythos, and I've heard takes that, like, I've heard people saying that they think this is the best Spider-Man movie, but they're all like big fans of Spider-Man. And the thing that I am wondering about is someone who is like very unfamiliar, right? Like, they basically just know that Spider-Man is a superhero that's like a spider, right? Like, like the kind of like 2-sentence description, and they've maybe like, they don't know the lore too much. I wonder if this movie is going to resonate with them as much. Which is kind of why in the pre-spoiler thing I said, I was trying to split the hairs between this and Homecoming. Because I don't know if this is like the easiest entry point if you don't know at least something about Spider-Man, right? Like, even lampoon it, right? Like, you've heard it, you've heard it before or whatever.
So I think it is, I don't know. I just feel like at this point it is baked into the popular consciousness enough such that the answer to that question is essentially there aren't many people like that anymore, right? In the same way that like nobody, in the same way that people complain in Batman vs Superman that we see, I knew I had to get a reference in, Mango, that we had to see Batman's origin for like the 80th time or whatever. The reason that complaint exists is because Batman is such a fundamental figure in the popular culture and consciousness that his backstory, right, that the founding moment of his character is ubiquitous such that everyone knows it by heart, right? And I think that what Spider-Man in this universe, in the Peter Parker version of Spider-Man, right, in our world is that level, and I don't think he was at that level always, right?
Sure.
I think this is kind of part of what I mean by like standing on the shoulders of giants, right? Like you have to do Uncle Ben in the first Spider-Man movie, no, because like people know Spider-Man. Spider-Man is probably the most popular superhero, right? But like superheroes are just kind of like breaking into the mainstream, and so people need to hear, with great power comes great responsibility, right? And then you hear it again in the 2010, Amazing Spider-Man reboot that was awful, but whatever. It had Martin Sheen, he was great. And then by the time you get to Homecoming, by the time you get to into the Spider-Verse, like we're there. We have hit that saturation point. This isn't even talking about like the 90s television show.
Sure.
The television show that is on right now called Ultimate Spider-Man, the Spectacular Spider-Man television show, which by the way is one of the best superhero shows of all time. And was cut down in its prime, and is also very much based, by the way, on the Ultimate Spider-Man mythos. But so all of those things together, I think, add up to a world in which you don't need to dwell on those pieces of the continuity anymore.
So I think I agree with you. I don't as in Homecoming, I don't think you need to show Peter getting bitten and Uncle Ben dying, but I do think that this movie has a slightly higher bar than that, and that I think it expects you to like be vaguely familiar with like the Spider-Verse aspects, right? Like I think that like it expects you to kind of
okay, so like you will accept Olivia Octavius. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, like that like so actually I think Olivia is probably like so like you have to know that like Otto Octavius is a person for Olivia Octavius to make sense. And I don't know if like those aspects of the Spider-Man lore are as ubiquitous. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. That's and I don't think that's like, again, I don't think that's a real grave. I think that like there is value in having a Spider-Man movie for Spider-Man fans. I just think that like that's kind of like the hair I want to split when it comes to Homecoming, which I think is much more friendly to someone who doesn't know all of that stuff, that is just coming from it as kind of like a generalized superhero fan or a Marvel fan.
Yeah.
And like again, that doesn't say anything negative about this movie. It's just a thing to observe, I would say.
No, I think I'm on board with that, and I think I'm on board with your with kind of your take. I think that there are some people who might be left in the dust a little bit, and they will look at and they'll be like, wait, I thought Dr. Octavius was a guy, and that's like a moment of kind of like weird confusion. And I sort of almost wonder if we've hit a point in like the cultural moment where just like those people are just kind of outnumbered, right? And that all of the people who are like, oh wow, what a cool way to do Doc Ock, right?
Yeah.
With these like inflato arms or whatever, are just like, if you're a producer in this movie and you just go like, okay, we're gonna take that for granted here.
Yeah. I also don't know
Yeah,
if they need to be necessarily outnumbered, right? Like I think there just need to be like a big enough percentage of people that will go and watch this and be happy with it. Right, like
yeah, I think there's also like a lot of little stuff that I think like hardcore Spider-Man fans, like for instance, do you know who the gray-skinned guy that was hanging around with?
No, I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, so that's a guy named Tombstone. He's
oh, okay. So
yeah.
In the Spider-Man game, Tombstone is a biker. He's pretty clearly coded as, I think, being African American.
Oh, really? Yeah.
And he's bald.
He is. Yeah. I think that is a little bit of like an alternate universe take.
Sure.
But Tombstone is just... Spider-Man has a huge cast of kind of organized crime figure characters. And they are all sort of like built on... They're all kind of like built on this thing of like Spider-Man is like a down-to-earth guy. So you have to have down to earth opponents for him, and organized crime is a lot more down to earth than like, for instance, like the Fantastic Four are fighting like interdimensional galactic monsters. That's always out of place for Spider-Man to a certain extent. But yeah, Tombstone is black. I think he's albino.
Okay.
And he has like his teeth are like shaved or whatever.
Yeah.
Because he's related to. Do you know Robbie Robertson, the like the black guy editor that is always like talking down J. Jonah Jameson?
No, I'm not familiar at all with that. I have no idea.
Okay, he's just like another supporting character. Anyway, yeah, Tombstone is related to that guy, and he is like a famous Spider-Man character, and he's been around for forever. I think he's been around since like the '80s. But like they never reference it or mention his name or anything like that. It's just like a visual thing, right? Like even like Scorpion, right? We all understand he's Scorpion because he has like Scorpion iconography like all over and everything like that. But yeah, I was actually a little bit I was actually kind of expecting to see some more of these kinds of like remixed, I guess I would call them, like supervillain characters. It's not just, you know, the Dr. Octopus. It's not just Scorpion. I was expecting to kind of see like more of like a rogues gallery, if that makes sense. But
yeah.
you know, it is what it is, right?
Yeah. I feel like if this is successful, maybe we'll get that.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it seems to be doing pretty good. It has amazing word of mouth, obviously. And
well, now this podcast is just so you know it's just going to go through the roof.
Yeah, oh, definitely. I'm very excited for everyone to come around to watching Into the Spider-Verse solely because of our opinion on it. And they've gotten to this point of the podcast, which is 50 minutes after the spoiler warning, in order to get to the decision to go see it.
What was the I was going to ask you something. Oh, so I know something I noticed, and I wanted to know if this was like a thing. So in the Spider-Man comic that Miles is reading out of, the character is named Billy. Is that like the Peter? What is ostensibly supposed to be Peter?
The Peter Parker character is named Billy.
Yeah, is that like a thing?
That is not a thing. But interestingly enough, the Peter Parker. The Peter Parker, he pulls off his mask, like Peter B. Parker pulls off his mask, or I'm sorry, Miles pulls off his mask and sees that the Peter Parker in this universe has blonde hair.
Yeah.
That is a reference to, and I actually thought that they were going to do this without, I thought that they were going to be like, that they were going to name him as Ben Reilly. Ben Reilly is a really important name because it is the name of Spider-Man's clone from the Clone Saga in the early 90s. Todd McFarlane's like insane and overreaching and incredibly convoluted and complicated storyline about clones. Spider-Man gets cloned, and the clone adopts a persona called the Scarlet Spider, and the clone's name is Ben Reilly. But the interesting thing about it, and you find out that he's a clone, is Ben Reilly is like a portmanteau of Uncle Ben and Aunt May's maiden name. She's May Riley, and then she marries Uncle Ben, becomes May Parker. And I thought that there was going to be some kind of, I just assumed that there was going to be some kind of like acknowledgement of that essence of the continuity in when they pulled him off, when they pulled it off and he had blonde hair, because that's like the defining feature. Peter Parker is a brunette, Ben Reilly is a blonde, and when you're doing this kind of like alternate universe shenanigans, I felt like that was kind of like something that they could have brought up if they wanted to.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That makes sense. Would have been neat. I assume that just like blonde Peter Parker was a thing from Ultimate. I have no idea.
No, it's not. Yeah, Peter Parker in the Ultimate Universe is just as brunette as as the rest of us.
So question: is there any significance to Peter B. Parker being B. Parker? Is that like a specific Peter Parker?
I think that it might be a reference to this Ben thing.
Okay.
But I have no idea.
Okay.
It's not even like Peter Parker's dad is Richard Parker. It's not even like a reference. I was trying to think of like Billy. Is there some other like Billy thing? Like no, yeah. It's just yeah.
Yeah. But yeah. So like before we run out of time in this segment, I wanted to ask you something that I had no. So first, I wanted to say that the post-credit scene is probably the best scene in any superhero movie that I have ever seen.
Yeah, basically.
At all.
Yep.
Who is that Spider-Man?
Oh man, yeah, no. So that's also an interesting thing, because I know that Spider-Man, and I felt like nobody in the audience knew. So that is Spider-Man 2099. His name is Miguel. 2099 was like another like kind of elsewhere. That's what the Marvel sort of like alternate universe kind of like imprint is, like these elsewhere titles. And there's a bunch of different 2099s. Like there's Punisher 2099, and I think there's like Captain America 2099. And these are just like a futuristic like take on the character. And the reason that I know Miguel, the reason that I know Spider-Man 2099 is because he was created and written by a writer that I like a lot named Peter David. It is, I think, just a gag. Like, this is another one of the alternate universe Spider-Man that we could have used, but we chose not to. And I'm a little bit sad about that because I always liked 2099, but like I get it. It's not something that like took off with any of the same degree.
Oh, I thought it was supposed to be a sequel hook.
I mean, maybe it is a sequel hook, and if it is, that would be very cool. There was actually a TV show, like Spider-Man Unlimited, if you remember that TV show, that was kind of like a spin-off of the original Spider-Man the Animated Series in the 90s, is kind of loosely based on this stuff, but like not quite. Yeah, that is Spider-Man 2099. He is not Peter Parker. He's not related to Peter Parker at all. His name is Miguel, and he's cool, and I don't really remember all that much about him or his stories at all.
Okay. The part where he goes back in time and goes into the original cartoon though is fantastic.
That was
like the famous pointing scene.
Funny. Yeah.
Also like the during the credits, there's like they do like Peter Parker sitting behind a desk with not Peter Parker, Spider-Man sitting behind the desk with the picture behind him. Like they played full into the memes for that one. I definitely want to when I can get it on video, just go through that end credit sequence because you can see that they like did like some random one-offs for the suits in between. I want to see if I know any of them. Because I saw them go by, but it was too fast for me to figure out like if I knew what anything was. But I thought that ending credit sequence was something special.
I thought that was also great. I'm actually really interested in like the memification, I guess I would call it, of some of these movies that we talked about it a little bit with Black Panther, and there my defense was like it is fundamentally a diegetic thing, right? Like she is a current age teenager who consumes meme culture, and that's just a small reflection of that, and I'm fine with it or whatever. But I sort of kind of like wonder to a certain extent about what makes a moment like that one different than a moment like Spider-Man Into the Spiderverse. And this is a little bit of a preview because I have seen a preview of the greatest movie of the year, Aquaman. It even pops up in Aquaman. And I remember like laughing and thinking it was cool, but then I was also like, what the fuck are we living in where like we're making these memey sort of references?
I mean, I think part of it is what we were talking about earlier, in that it's like a hyper real movie, so it feels less out of place. And in that sense, it makes some sense. Whereas it's not the case for Black Panther. I also think that like I think there's an aspect of it where like it only works if you're winking at the camera when it happens. If that makes sense, right? Like. I think the reason that I reacted so strongly, so negatively to it happening in Black Panther is it's not like, like it would have been weird if I can't remember the character's name anymore, but if she had said, "What are those?" and then looked at the camera and like winked, right? Like that would have been totally off base. But like in order for it to work, I feel like it needs to be kind of like lampshaded in a way. In order for it to like feel right? And it happening in a post-credit scene, I think, is an appropriate amount of like recognition from the filmmaker that they're in on enough of a wink to the audience that it works better. At least.
I'm very interested to hear your take on the. This is like a teaser. This is the trailer for next week's episode, which is going to be the most in-demand episode of some Derps talk about games, I'm sure. Because next week's episode is going to be on the Aquaman movie, and there is a thing like this in Aquaman, and it is kind of neither of these, right? Well, and we'll talk about it.
I'm sure we will.
You got to remind me to bring it up.
Yeah, I'm sure we will, and I don't know. I'm sure that will be an exciting episode to say the least.
I'm very excited.
Yeah.
Yeah, for real.
I like. Do you have the reviews come in for Aquaman yet? Like, what's
They are resoundingly positive. It's got a 75 or whatever on Rotten Tomatoes. Who knows? Whatever. I actually agree with a lot of the reviews. Here's my spoiler-free review of Aquaman, and this is my pitch for why you should go see it. I think everybody should go see this movie. This is one of the biggest movies I feel like I've seen in a long time. It makes all of these other movies that I have thought of as big movies really small in comparison, and I don't really know how to explain this. It is 6 movies in one, right? And that might sound bad or incongruous or anything, but it just has this crazy magic to it that all of these pieces fit well together. And I'm not even gonna I could literally be it is part this, part that, part this, but I'm not gonna do any of that because I know that it would kind of get into spoilery territory because people would make inferences. But yeah, it is the biggest movie I feel like I've seen in a long time. Maybe the biggest movie since Batman vs Superman or Man of Steel, which I also think of as very or even Wonder Woman. I mean, it is well in the vein of the kind of mythic level DC movies where things are just huge. And I don't know. I loved that. I thought that all of that stuff was great. It's got breathtaking action. It was really funny. And it was a roller coaster. I got out of the movie and I turned to Rachel and I said, I am exhausted just by running. It's just, I don't know. It's just so much. There's so much that goes on, and there's so much that happens, and it's coming out of Jurassic Park the first time, or something, or one of these kind of movies that really gets you, riding the roller coaster, in the theater. So that's my spoiler-free take on Aquaman. It is far and away my favorite movie of the year. I cannot believe in our Black Panther review I said that it would be impossible for Aquaman to reach these levels. I was such a liar, you guys. Yeah. Holy shit. I'm super excited to talk about it, and
I'm super excited to see it. I actually something I've never done before. I booked D-Box tickets for this.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I've actually heard that D-Box is very cool. Larry, friend of the pod, Larry says that D-Box is a really neat way to go see movies.
Yeah, so I'll have a review of that, I guess, next week as well. See, I'm happy to hear that it's. I feel like I have heard that the D-Box is best with epic scope movies, right? You're not going to use D-Box to go see 3 billboards outside of Ebbing, Missouri. So
that's funny. Yeah, no, that's real.
So yeah, but we're deep into the back half now. So let's have you go first. How was your week besides Aquaman?
Besides Aquaman, right? the big thing that happened this week is the release of patch 8.1. It's called Tides of Vengeance. I just feel so at odds with the World of Warcraft community. Maybe it's just because the WoW subreddit has kind of I think that there's something to this idea that the WoW subreddit has kind of descended into some and kind of self-selected for a certain amount of sort of frustrated toxicity regarding the game, just everybody is constantly bitching about the game in that subreddit. And if you are someone who has positive feelings about the game, like my entire guild who doesn't go on Reddit and doesn't see this stuff, seems to be enjoying the expansion, just fine. But yeah, I love this Tides of Vengeance, all of this WoW stuff. It is so cool to see the faction leaders be the main characters in the ongoing World of Warcraft storyline, and that it is entirely tied into their identity, right? As leaders of factions, right? So the big thing that happens in 8.1 is that Tyrande and the Night Elves return to Darkshore because they are going to reclaim their homeland from the Forsaken. So there's this Forsaken versus Night Elf questing kind of content. And then there's the new Warfront that is the first Warfront is Arathi in the Arathi Highlands and is orcs versus humans, like very classic. And this is the Scourge versus Night Elves in Warcraft 3 terms, the Forsaken versus the Night Elves. But like I just have a really easy time of kind of like getting into it and like riding the roller coaster, which I feel like other people don't have an easy time doing because they can't like, in a way they have a harder time sort of separating out of their one character and their one perspective as a player on the story and on like the ethics of the Warcraft universe. And so I played through the Horde side where you're fighting with Nathanos Blightcaller against Tyrande, right? And I was just like, yeah, fuck you, you pretentious moon bitch. Like, you know, like I was getting into it, you know, just from fighting these night elves. And then I went and I immediately played the Alliance side and I was like, you Horde scum, I'm gonna burn you alive. Like, you know, like I have a really easy time getting into this stuff. And I feel like I'm the only one who ever does that. It seems like a lot of the time I see a lot of these arguments about like, oh, the night elves are chumps and the Forsaken are cool, or the Forsaken are, you know, chumps and the night elves are cool, and all this kind of stuff. Which in a way sort of like, I almost kind of think it's like a good thing because it means people are like taking the universe and like the stakes and everything seriously, but like they're also getting very competitive about it, which I think is like kind of the wrong point of view to have.
So I think that the issue is that people identify very strongly with one faction, and Blizzard encourages that, right? Like, the ads around BFA were like a dude with a Horde patch that sees like a girl with like an Alliance patch and goes like, won't like sit next to her on the bus or something, right? Like that's like, you know, like that's like definitely a part of like what World of Warcraft is that factionalism, especially since like it's the only game that really offers that. Like every other game does not have the multiple factions, at least right now.
And even those that do, I feel like they don't play up the faction conflict in the same way, right? Like World of Warcraft has 30 years of continuity of like bad blood to kind of like draw on. And I also think that people with a one faction playstyle are well within their rights to do that, right? Like, but there's a certain kind of, I almost want to call it like an insecurity that I feel like comes out, and this kind of surrounded the talk about like the Darkshore Warfront, which is essentially that like Tyrande goes through this crazy ritual. She turns herself into the Night Warrior, which is like the super powerful, vengeful aspect of the moon goddess Elune. And then she goes and she fights Nathanos, right? And they fight to a standstill. And basically there was this eruption among the Alliance player base who were like, you know, Tyrande is this, you know, crazy powerful. She's the chosen of Elune. She just went through this ritual, right? And she can't hold up to a dead guy with a fucking bow and arrow. Like, this is bullshit. And I actually kind of think that is a correct assumption in a certain sense. Like, yeah, Nathanos Blightcaller isn't on the same power level as Tyrande, but I feel like the natural endpoint of a story where Tyrande just wipes the floor with Nathanos is super shitty, right? And just tells Horde players that they're also shitty people because like he is the Horde surrogate in this situation, right? And that like there's a weird paradox where like you want players to identify with the factions, but you can never really have like one faction claim a true victory over the other. It always kind of has to be these give and take sort of bittersweet shades of gray, and it is hard to pull that stuff off. And I don't know, like, you know, people were talking about one of the things about the Horde side is you're running around with a Valkyr and you're resurrecting night elves that died in the War of the Thorns and turning them into a new series of Dark Rangers, right? And that like, and the capstone is that Dalaran Summermoon, who is the ranger in Sylvanas' cinematic, who she's like, you can't kill Hope, and she's like, can't I? Like, that ranger gets rezzed and joins the Forsaken, and then also a warden named Sira something also gets rezzed and joins the Forsaken, and they are the faction leaders of the Darkshore Warfront, right? And people were really mad about that. Like, people were really like pissed about that, and they were like, you know, how can the Night Elves would never do this, right? They died defending their place from Sylvanas. Why would they ever become, why would like they ever kind of become Forsaken? And I kind of understand that to a certain extent. And like, but I think that the core part of this is that is the Night Elf view on a Forsaken kind of situation in a way. And I think it is well within, like, it is part of the Forsaken power fantasy, essentially, that Forsaken, return people from the dead and they join the Forsaken, right? And that there is a choice there. They willingly do so. There's not like mind control or anything like that. There's quests and Cataclysm that talk about this. And that like the Night Elf player who wants all Night Elves to be perfectly, kind of like defiant in the face of their own resurrection. All Night Elf players who want that are essentially trying to rob the Forsaken players of their empowerment fantasy. In the same way that if the Forsaken were like, wow, it's such bullshit that, in the quest scenario, the Night Elves keep coming out of nowhere and attacking me because they're all stealthed and like hunting me through the forest or whatever. Because that being stealthed and hunting someone through the forest is like the Night Elf fantasy. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think we've talked about this a little bit before, but I think part of the fundamental problem too is that the kind of like the scourge or the undead kind of mechanics of coming back to life never really get like I think this might be the first time that like those problems have ever had a light shown on them, right? Like it's always been kind of like anonymous people, and so like there's not too much weight to whether or not they choose to come back or not. And if there has been weight, it's been in a place where it's very clear why they wanted to do that, right? Like Sylvanas was against her will, I believe, right? And like kind of major players like have reasons for wanting to be angry about it, right? Like was it Lillian Voss? I think like initially rejects it, right, and then comes around. And those are all kind of like arcs, right, for lack of a better term, or like they're like characters who are inconsequential whether or not they choose or not. And I think it's a real problem for kind of like the stakes of the lore in that if someone who is so dedicated to the Night Elves is willing to turn on a dime like that, what does that say about like the power of the scourge? It kind of like beggars belief that
I also and see the other thing is, and I suggested I had an argument with somebody about this who's like a Night Elf player, and they got very mad when I suggested this. I actually think that the solution to this problem is to show the Night Elves as unaccepting, right? This is kind of how they got around it in the first place, right? The first humans that the Forsaken ever interact with are the Scarlet Crusade, so it's not like no Forsaken gets rezzed and is like, no Scarlet Crusader who gets rezzed is going to look and go back and be like, oh, hey, welcome me back to the Scarlet Crusade. No, the Scarlet Crusade fucking hate undead and they're going to target you just like anything else. And so like, there's a certain amount of like, you are Forsaken because when you die, you are literally, the true definition of the word Forsaken by like your people, right? Even Stormwind didn't accept back the Forsaken or anything along those lines. And I was kind of hoping that we would see some of that from the Night Elves, right? Like a Night Elf Ranger would get resurrected and then kind of initially rebuke the Horde, right? But then all of her Ranger friends start like peppering her with arrows or whatever, right? Because they are just as prejudiced as the Scarlet Crusade was in the first place. And I think that they have every right to be, obviously, right? Like the Forsaken literally committed genocide against their people. And so like I was kind of hoping for something along like those lines, but then the Night Elf player says, I don't, obviously the Night Elves would never do that, right? They would never be so like unaccepting. They would never be so like dogmatic and kind of zealous. And I'm a little bit like,
wait, isn't that like part of the night? Like that feels like a very Night Elf thing.
That's exactly. I don't know. That's exactly what I said. Maybe I'm just like relitigating an argument I had with somebody to a certain extent, and we were just like too deep in the argument to really like come to terms with this sort of thing. I also think part of it is just that like we have to accept that like faction leaders are about the same power level, right?
Right.
Yeah. Bane Bloodhoof is just a warrior, and Velen is a 25,000-year-old prophet who masterminded the defeat of the Legion or whatever else, right? But you better believe that if Bane Bloodhoof gets in a fight with Prophet Velen, I want that to be a fair fight, you know? As a Tauren player, I don't want to watch the kind of player surrogate, like the surrogate for all Tauren people, just be like curb stomped because, you know, when we were fighting the Legion, like Velen was written to be like whatever, like a superpower. And now that he has to kind of come back down to earth, right? Like we can't kind of address that. I think that this is a problem with a lot of Alliance leaders, to be honest. A lot of the Horde faction leaders, basically all of the Horde faction leaders except for Sylvanas, are just kind of guys, right? You've got Bane, right? You've got Gallywix, who's just rich, you know, there's not a lot special about him besides that. You've got Sourfang, who is just a warrior. That's his whole thing, right? He has no magic. He's not Thrall. Thrall and Vol'jin are both gone. So I kind of feel like that's like a part of this is, to a certain extent, Blizzard has painted themselves into a corner by upping the power of the different faction leaders in different ways, such that like the idea that Nathanos Blightcaller could stand toe to toe with Tyrande and Malfurion Stormrage is like a travesty.
I think maybe one of the missteps here was like having Tyrande do like whatever this ritual you talked about was, because I feel like that probably like throws fuel on a lot of fuel on that fire.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit better. People were mad about it initially, but I actually feel like it plays out pretty well because Nathanos gets away. They're fighting over the resurrection of Syrah and Delarin, and Syrah and Delarin get resurrected and kind of like turn the tides. It's like this group of them essentially, and Tyrande kills one of the Valkyr. Sylvanas only has 9, and a bunch of them have died so far. I think she only has 3 left, and so. It puts us in this position, I guess, of where like it looks like on the tables, like so like Tyrande wasn't powerful enough, but you actually go through a whole scenario where she walks into this like Forsaken settlement and just completely kills everybody except for one guy, and she's like, tell my story, you know, like that like badass thing, and you're running around in this whole scenario kind of like chasing after her and seeing all the devastation that she brings, and then she kills the Valkyr and she's like, you know, I feel pretty good. She's like, you know, I feel pretty good about a Valkyr, but the thing that we accomplished today is we created a beachfront, like a spearhead for our armies to take back Darkshore, and then you immediately transition into the Darkshore Warfront, where you are the Night Elves attacking the Forsaken power base in the area. And so, like, in all of that context, it actually doesn't feel as bad. And I think it's kind of taken a little bit out of context when people are just like, well, she couldn't beat Nathanos. Well, she, you know, I mean, yeah, but she got Nathanos to retreat off of the shore and then got on a hippogriff and was like, okay, now. And the army of the Black Moon forms and they attack everybody. I don't know. Maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm not enough of a Night Elf player to like, I don't know. I try and keep above sort of these like factional things because at the end of the day, it's all made up. Like,
yeah.
You know?
Fair enough.
It's kind of like asking a question of like, who would win, Obi-Wan or Batman?
Yeah, no, makes sense. All right.
Anyway, what's going on with you? Tell me about your life.
So, you know, the first thing I want to bring up is, as of this morning, the super best friends who were, at least in part, my inspiration for wanting to kind of have decided to end their show effective immediately. So that has made me very sad all day today. I highly recommend you guys go check out some of their content. There's 9 years of it to go through if you like it.
Jesus, 9 years.
Yeah. They've been doing it for a while. And, you know, this is very sudden. As of their last podcast, they were talking about the videos they were going to record. So this obviously happened very quickly. The two of them, Pat and Willie, are going to continue doing the podcast, so maybe details will be forthcoming. Just a thing that I wanted to shout out because I've been a big fan of them for, I think, most of those 9 years. You know, it's a sad day on that kind of front. Otherwise, I've been playing a lot of Smash Brothers, World of Light almost exclusively, I'm sorry, I don't know any of like the Smash Brothers content. What is World of Light? World of Light is the kind of single player campaign mode, and it's not great. So the thing,
Is this the adventure mode that
yeah,
I've heard about?
basically,
Okay.
yeah. So like the conceit is that you're fighting these spirits that are, the spirits are like they're like from all sorts of different video games. And the way it works is that each fight you have is like an embodiment of that spirit. They do like a couple of different mechanics that make it seem like it's that spirit, right? Like the spirit for like who's a good example? Like Waddle Dee, which is like a basic enemy in Kirby.
Right.
Will or not Waddle Dee, the one with the eye beam, right? Like it's like a bunch of red colored Kirby's with super scopes, right? So it's neat. It evokes what that character is. I think it's like a really cool way to do it. But it gets tedious after a while. The other thing is that not all of the characters are unlocked from the beginning, and like unlike in say a game like in like the Subspace Emissary, which was like the Brawl. I think it was Brawl.
Yeah. I remember that from Brawl.
Yeah. Which kind of pioneered this format that a lot of other games do, which is like you play through different characters as you progress through the story, because they kind of tie into it. There's no real need for that, right? Like there's not a lot of tie. Like the story is very minimal, and so I've just kind of been aggravated because I've been playing as a character that I'm not a super big fan of, because I'm pretty sure I'm like 3/4 of the way through the story, and like I just haven't unlocked my character yet. And it's not the same unlock system for the regular game, right? Like I've unlocked all the characters for the.
And which is your character? Is that Incineroar?
Ganondorf.
Oh, Ganondorf, right? Yeah. No,
also, I would like to play with Incineroar. I just unlocked.
Yeah, no, I remember
and,
we talked about Incineroar.
Yeah, I just unlocked K-Roll in this mode, and what I should be doing is going and playing the regular modes and then just doing that and not caring about it. But I want to finish it out just to kind of say I did. But I also am not a fan of the fact that it was all that all the extra characters were locked from the beginning. I think that's an old trope that doesn't really need to be in fighting games anymore. I get.
Oh, really? I do like that trope, but I do think that it should be like because I remember there were a couple of characters that were locked in the original Smash Brothers, so it wasn't very many. It was like 4 of the 12, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like that's a pretty good ratio, especially when they are sort of like specialty characters. So like it gives you something to like work for, but like you still have like a big meaty roster to work with. I feel like in Brawl, in like Melee and in Brawl, there were a lot more characters who were locked, and some of them were locked behind like really crazy things. Like I felt like it took forever to unlock Wolf, for instance.
Yeah. So, you start out with the original 8 unlocked, and there are 74 characters in this. So
Yeah. Wow. That's actually kind of bullshit. I feel like.
Yeah. So like I also don't. I think for like a game that is primarily a multiplayer fighting game, I don't think having things like I'm okay with it in concept being locked for the adventure mode, because like that's part of what that is. I just think it's poorly executed in this current adventure mode, and it doesn't have the same like weird unlocking requirements that they did in the earlier games, right? It's like 1 every 10 minutes, literally. Like you can back out. Like as soon as 10 minutes has passed, a new challenger approaching will pop, and you can go fight it and unlock a new character.
Oh, okay.
So for the multiplayer mode, I have all the characters unlocked, but that was kind of tedious, right? It was literally me sitting down and playing World of Light, and then putting a timer on my phone. And after 10 minutes elapsed, backing out, fighting the challenger fight, and going back into challenger mode, hitting the 10-minute timer again, and going and playing again. So
And having to do that for 66 characters total?
Not quite, because you can unlock like when you unlock a character in World of Light, it also gets unlocked in the outer game. But if you unlock it in the outer game, it doesn't unlock in World of Light. So it was a slightly better ratio than that, but it wasn't great. But yeah, I was not a super huge fan of that. But it's a Smash game. It's a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to playing it playing some multiplayer going forward. The last thing I wanted to talk about was, did you hear this announcement about Heroes of the Storm? They're like significant.
Yeah. They discontinued the Blizzard. God, what are they called?
Heroes of the Dorm.
The esports. Yeah, Heroes of the Dorm, and like the
esports
the
championship,
global championship or something like that. And they moved a couple of the devs to other teams.
Yeah. So Heroes of the Storm is getting pulled back on. The speculation around this is because of like essentially you can't like the speculation is that recently the Chinese the Chinese like censors, like they're like a member of the propaganda board. It's like the
Oh
literal
yeah,
title.
no, I saw that. Yeah,
Yeah,
like 20 games or whatever.
Yeah, that's not like the exact content of those games are not confirmed, but the speculation is that that Heroes of the Storm is not going to be allowed going forward, and so like that the the tinfoil conspiracy is that the execs at Activision have said to Blizzard, you no longer get to develop this game because we're not going to make the big Chinese money. Go make something else.
I actually kind of feel like, not that this is the natural state, because I do feel for like the Heroes of the Storm subreddit and all of like the people there, but Heroes is a game that gets like a good amount of activity and play, and I feel like that pushing it to be an esport was kind of the wrong move. And I do think that Heroes of the Dorm and getting rid of kind of like, you know what I mean? Some games are just not esports, and
Sure.
some games are just kind of party games, and that's okay. And I feel like you can let Overwatch League, and you can let WoW fucking Mythic Time Trials, which is the weirdest esport ever, but it's the WoW esport now. Or you can allow, or you can have like Hearthstone. Obviously is like a big esport, right? Yeah, I just kind of feel like the proper place for Heroes of the Storm is kind of as like a party game for you and your friends, and not like a super hyper competitive game trying to be League of Legends. The thing that I like about Heroes of the Storm is that it's not League of Legends, right?
You know who you sound like? You sound like a Smash fanboy who's mad that people play
really?
Smash. Like that is like this is like a big thing that like the developer of Smash was like, I hate that people play it seriously. That's why he put tripping
that,
in
yeah.
Brawl. But like it's so one, I don't think that like necessarily. So my lesson from all of this, because part of this is that like a bunch of esports teams basically closed shop off of this because like they weren't warned ahead of time, and they have nothing to do now. So like, well, I guess we're done. And I think that the thing that I want to take that I kind of taking out of this is that I think it's kind of a mistake for developers to own these esports leagues. Because they're kind of like driven by those incentives. I think this is the one thing that the FGC has over traditional esports is that.
Oh yeah, all of the esports are not owned in house.
Yeah, like Capcom runs
makes sense.
some of its own tournaments, but the big ones are all independent, right? Evo is run by like a guy called Mr. Wizard, I think his name is, and he runs an individual. Like he doesn't, he obviously there's more than just him on it, but like it's not tied to any of these games individually, and so they're a overarching business decision does not sink the entire esport, and I think that's the direction that that they should be looking at, or like just I guess diversifying into different games. That way, if one company decides to drop their esports, they're not totally sunk. I don't know. I just feel like this was going to happen at some point. That some game was going to like close up shop in a real like esports. People who had like put their lives into this thing are no longer going to be able to like make their livelihood off of it, and it sucks, especially if like I don't know about any of the players, but I could easily see that like maybe some of them didn't go to college because of this, right? And like caveat emptor or whatever, but you having it be in the hands of a business whose primary concern isn't the survival of isn't the survival of the sport. It's like the product that backs the sport. I think is inevitably going to lead to these kinds of things. And I think you'd be foolish to be an e-athlete in that kind of situation, right? Like I think like if Overwatch League, suddenly isn't making enough money, this happens to them too, right? There's no reason for it not to, and that would be sad. It's great that Blizzard's willing to put money into it, but like, I think it wants to be a little bit more homegrown, I guess, as it were, or at least kind of like, not so dependent on Chinese buy-in, which is like, is a weird thing to say, but like it appears if these rumors are true, which they might not be, but if these rumors are true, then it's like. The whims of or this esport survives on the whims of the Chinese government, which is not a bet that I ever would want to take, just because of the way that they view kind of like censorship and whatnot. I don't know. Seems like a shitty situation. You have any other thoughts?
You know, it's tough. I feel like there is space in Blizzard's roster for like a slow burn game like Heroes of the Storm that's not releasing tons and tons of new content. You're putting in a new hero every once in a while, and I feel like that's the kind of core of it. Maybe this is part. I actually think part of this is just the relationship that I have with Heroes of the Storm, and that like my friends have with Heroes of the Storm, who are people that don't know. You know, like the meta is something that doesn't exist in Heroes as much as it does in other esports, and I think that that's a plus.
I think it does exist. I think we just don't play it that way.
No, it definitely does exist. I just mean in the League or even Hearthstone is like defined by the meta, right? Like, and that the meta is like the kind of end all be all. And I think that there is more room compared to those sorts of games for in Heroes of the Storm because I think it's competitive, right? But I don't think that it is hyper competitive in the same way that something like League or Dota 2 or anything kind of along like I am not bragging about my rank in Heroes of the Storm to anybody. I don't think that's the game.
I think the kind of like operative thing there is that quick play enables that. I don't think there's like quick play lets you pick your hero ahead of time and just kind of go right and like play like what is essentially a very non-team focused way, which is kind of like anathema to a lot of MOBAs. And because it enables that style of play, whenever you play quick play, you're playing with those types of people, and that's fine, right? Like for people who want to enjoy that. Whereas League doesn't really have that option, so your only choice is to play semi-seriously, and so it's. So I see what you're saying. I think I agree to a certain extent. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, anything else you want to talk about before we wrap this up?
No, I think that's it.
All right. Well, if you'd like to email us and tell us what you think about Into the Spiderverse, wow, or any of the other things we talked about on this podcast, you can email us at subderpsplaygames@gmail.com or podcast@subderpsplaygames.com. You can follow us at twitch.tv/subderpsplaygames. We still haven't set the final date for Hell's Rebels, but we will soon. Right, buddy? Right?
Yeah, yeah. Fuck my whole life, you guys.
And you can find us on iTunes. Leave us a review, and if you'd be so kind to leave us comments. I think that's everything I had. Buddy, did you have anything else you wanted to promote?
I have nothing else I'm looking to promote.
In that case, until next time, dear listeners.
Until next time, loyal listeners.